Hello and welcome to the Sonic Cinema podcast. My name is Brian Scuttle. Thank you for joining me at www.sonic-cinema.com, as well as the Sonic Cinema podcast YouTube channel. You can also check us out on Google, Apple, Spotify, basically wherever you listen to podcasts. That is the Sonic Cinema podcast. Please rate and review us where you can. You can also check me out at patreon.com/Sonic Cinema. And you can also check out my music at Bandcamp if you're interested in my original music. So we are actually recording this on the day of the Academy Awards, but we are looking ahead to the baseball season, which will be starting in the coming week or so. And joining me to talk about a few baseball movies is a film critic, Danielle Solzman. Thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
So this is your first time on the podcast, and as such, I wanted to go ahead and get a little bit of background about what drew you to writing about movies, talking about movies, just having a love for movies in general.
Well, I fell in love with movies dating back to Steven Spielberg's Jurassic Park in 1993. Just the awe of and splendor of looking at dinosaurs on the screen. Aside from the part where they're trying to eat you and kill you.
And that's certainly the adventure. I know for me watching, by that point I'd been a huge fan of Spielberg's, of his work in the 70s and 80s, and Jurassic Park really kind of rekindled that for me, and I definitely understand getting that jolt of those movies. And actually Danielle and I are talking about doing an episode later on this year on the Jurassic Park franchise. It's Jurassic World Dominion comes in. So what was it about? Was it basically as simple as just that experience of Jurassic Park that made you want to write about movies, or was it anything else?
It's a multi-part answer. Between Jurassic Park in 93 and the Star Wars special editions in 97, that was really what cemented the decision to eventually go into filmmaking. Of course, a lot of things happened between now and then. 2000 had this foray into American politics, and then 2003 during Welcome Week on campus, lo and behold, Second City Tour co-performs and the Improv Bug bites. And then it's really not until 2007, after graduating college, between Knocked Up and going on Birthright Israel, that everything came back to pretty much going into filmmaking / comedy.
Okay.
But what started me with writing about film is summer of 2013. I'd previously been writing a political blog that I later turned into an outlet for book reviews, but every now and then I would, of course, write about movies, including what I felt were the best films of the year, and where I would issue my awards, which have since become known as the Solzy Awards. And so we're vacationing in Tampa for Ray's Red Sox game, and I was writing for fan-sided outlets for the St. Louis Cardinals and Kentucky Wildcats at the time. The higher-ups posted in the Google group about restarting their film site and looking for writers, and the rest is history.
Okay. Where can people, we'll go ahead and get an early plug out for your work. Where can people find your work online?
Solzy at the Movies, SOLZY, themovies.com. And people can find me on Twitter at Danielle SATM. And Facebook page is also Solzy at the Movies.
Okay. And you mentioned being in Tampa for a Tampa Bay Rays game. That leads us into the discussion of the day, which is baseball movies. And was there a reason that baseball, more than any other sports, kind of caught your attention, or is it just as matter just growing up as a fan of the sport?
I mean, I grew up in Louisville, Kentucky. We had the St. Louis affiliate for so many years before they left us for Memphis, and we had the Brewers for 2 seasons, and then it's been the Reds ever since back home in Louisville. But the Allegiant stuck. I mean, I can every time Field of Dreams is on TV, like I will stop what I'm doing and I will not stop watching until it ends. And if it encores, I will continue watching until either it gets back to where I started, or maybe I end up watching it in its entirety again. And I own the movie.
Yeah. And we'll certainly get into Field of Dreams because that was one of the movies that you put out there when I asked you about your favorite baseball movies. And this was one that I was definitely curious to watch because I will admit this was my first time seeing it in its entirety and getting ready for this podcast. So it was definitely a good experience to be able to finally watch that. And we'll go ahead and get started in this. When it comes to baseball movies, what is the most important thing to you when it comes to how baseball is portrayed in movies?
I mean, the most important thing is, do you have Kevin Costner cast in your film or not? He's been in 3 of them.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just thinking about that because of the fact that he did Bull Durham, then he did Field of Dreams, and they later did For Love of the Game with Sam Raimi. And I think, for me, I've always been I've just been underdog sports genre fan. I mean, I've talked elsewhere and other places that's a little bit of my kryptonite, where it's like, if you do an underdog sports story, chances are I will at least get behind your movie to a certain extent, because it's really kind of hard to mess that formula up. And one of the things that I think is kind of interesting, at least is that we have 3 movies that we're going to be talking about today where, in a way, they each deal with underdogs in sports with regards to sports in their own ways. But I mean, certainly some are more conventionally about the sport itself, and others deal more in social issues or personal issues. And what is it about? And we'll go ahead and get started. We'll actually start with the one with 1989's Field of Dreams, written and directed by Phil Alden Robinson. And like you said, this one stars Kevin Costner, and that is certainly a big benefit to any movie about sports, whether it's this, whether it's Bull Durham, whether it's Tin Cup. I think he just has he has an interest in that type of story and those type of characters that is really kind of interesting to watch. When did you first see Field of Dreams for the first time?
I saw it probably early 90s. I can't remember if that was one that I saw in theaters or not. I mean, I was only, 5 years old in late 1989. Mm-hmm. So it was probably one that I was introduced to at some point in the early 90s.
Yeah. What is it about? And we'll go ahead and get a little bit into the story. This is based on a novel, and it's about a man who had a fractured relationship with his father, but one of the things that his father did pass down was an appreciation for baseball, and especially the Chicago White Sox in the 19-teens, and in particular the team of the White Sox that had Shoeless Joe Jackson and was had 8 members of it banned for accused of tanking games. And he buys a cornfield with his wife and his daughter in tow, and one day he hears a voice in the cornfield that says, "If you build it, he will come." And that leads him on this journey of self-discovery, but also a little bit of madness in creating a baseball diamond in the middle of a cornfield. And one day, Shoeless Joe Jackson is out there. The ghost of Shoeless Joe Jackson is out there. And the story that this movie takes you on is really fascinating to me. And I think it gets to this romantic idea of baseball that a lot of us kind of grow up with, this idea of the love of the game, America's pastime, and the way it's passed down from parents to children. And I think that's one of the things that's so strong about this film.
Oh, I mean, for sure. I mean, just dating back to 1996, my family went on family vacations every year. There was always a baseball park involved. Sometimes there were a few parks involved.
Yeah, I know. We didn't, I was from Ohio, so I mean, I went to a couple of Indians games when we growing up, but really it wasn't until we moved down to Georgia in the '80s and started watching the Atlanta Braves, and we went to a bunch of Braves games, especially in the run starting from 1991 to about 1993, 1994, as they were getting better, as they were continuing to go to the World Series and make the playoffs. And I know one of my most vivid memories with my dad is being at that Game 7 of the NLCS where Sid Bream slid into home. And it's a memory that I will never forget. It's just one of those things where it's like I can say that I was at that game. I mean, I've been to other really good games and other really good sporting events, but nothing's just ever gonna come close to it. And I think that's part of I think that's one of the things that really that's one of those memories that really has stood out to me in following sports, because of the fact that it's one of those I just never expected. You would never have expected that type of situation to play out, and the fact that it did was just so remarkable. And it really, you see the passion in the players when that happens. And I think in Field of Dreams, you have those moments where, whether it's just warming up or whether they're playing the game, that you see the players playing on that field, you do get a sense that they're having something returned to them that was taken from them. And I think that's one of those things that's really great about this.
Yeah, I mean, just the story of Moonlight Graham. I mean, here's a guy who plays in Major League Baseball for maybe one game.
Mm-hmm.
His career comes to an end, and then Kevin's character's daughter is choking there in the stands, and this is around that time where Timothy Busfield's like, "You have to sell the farm," and then all of a sudden, Moonlight Graham becomes Doc Graham, and next thing you know, Kevin's brother-in-law is finally understanding why the field was built.
Mm-hmm.
And is like, "You cannot sell this farm."
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, as much as this, I think this is one of those films that I think is kind of interesting because of the fact that it deals with the nature of faith in a lot of ways that is in one of the ways that I'm most intrigued by, which is sort of separating the idea of faith from religion and making it to where it's an idea that is palpable, that can be achieved by anybody, regardless of how religious or not religious you are. The idea that Kevin Costner has this absolutely crazy notion come into his head of creating a baseball field in the middle of Iowa, and he has to sort out the reason for himself, but he just feels like he has to do it. There's a purpose for him doing it. And I think one of the things that kind of surprised me in watching this for the first time, it showed just how much I how much my notions of the movie, just based on the scenes I had seen, was wrong because of the fact that it's like you don't get to up until the very end there, you still have this idea of, well, they're still in very big trouble financially speaking, and you don't have this idea of coming up with them selling tickets to show this farm off, show this amazing idea off, and he just kind of really does have to take on faith to go on this adventure, this journey.
Yeah.
I will say one of the things that I did notice in this film that I do want to bring up is the score by James Horner, which is absolutely wonderful. He's been one of my favorite composers for a long time, and he's one of the reasons I wanted to compose music. And I will say I was kind of disappointed when I went to add this score to my streaming music services that was only available in like playlists that other fans have chosen, as opposed to being available just in its original forms. That kind of disappoints me. But one of the things that really, and this is I mean, he was, I guess, about 10 years into his career at this time. But one of the things that I think this illustrates in Horner is this ability for him to really capture something emotionally, but also doing something that's very mysterious, very haunting as well, in his use of different instruments, different sounds to really get to the emotions of the film.
This is where I feel guilty for not watching the movie on Friday or Saturday. I think I ended up doing my rewatch around the time of the Field of Dreams game, if not beforehand. Because I know I had it on, I had the 2-disc, was it DVD or Blu-ray that I got back in the day at Best Buy or Circuit City, one of those stores. And then during the pandemic, I made the upgrade to 4K.
Yeah.
So it's been a few years since I like really watched the film, watched the bonus features. But I mean, it's one of those where if MLB Network is playing it, I am watching it.
Yeah. Well, and it's also one of those movies where it's like, I can understand now that I've seen it, that once you've seen it, like there are going to be scenes that stand out. The scene where he's back in 1972 talking to Doc Graham, and getting the idea of his first scenes with Terrence Mann, the James Earl Jones character, and the journey that they go on. And, it's like I had so many different, that's one of those things where based on what I knew of the movie, I just did not have the right perceptions of what that movie was. And now that I've seen it, it's like, oh, this is so much richer than I expected it to be. And it really does. I get the appeal of this to people when it comes to what it gets to about baseball and what it gets to in terms of the idea of relationships that we might have with our parents and or children, such as it may be, that are complicated, and and sometimes you need that one thing. I know for me, it was really more Scouts with my dad that really brought us together. With my mom, it was more movies that brought us together, and this is one of those things where it's like, I get that. I get that what this is getting at when it comes to, even regardless of something, there can always be something that kind of brings you a bit closer with your parents sometimes.
Yeah, like I think back to a few weeks ago when I first watched The Adam Project on Netflix. Late in the film where they're playing catch with each other, like I'm flashing back to the end of Field of Dreams.
Yeah, and it's like, this is, it's interesting to see all of the different names in here, like Timothy Busfield, you mentioned, Ray Liotta, Shoeless Joe Jackson, Burt Lancaster's Doc Graham, James Earl Jones as Terrence Mann, Frank Wally as young Doc Graham. It's one of those things where you watch a movie like this, you see the ensemble, and it's always cool to see like actors that you've come to know over the years for different things in a movie that you're not as familiar with, and see them in something, see how different they are in that particular.
Yeah, and Costner's not the only one who's been in other baseball films. I mean, you have James Earl Jones in The Sandlot, which is another classic.
Mm-hmm.
Timothy Busfield is in Little Big League, which is one of those that I'll watch whenever it's on MLB Network or check it on the DVR when I feel like it.
Mm-hmm. What is probably the scene in particular in this one that stands out to you the most as far as like maybe having the most impact?
For me, I mean, I'm not sure if I could pinpoint a scene in particular, but I mean, Terrence Mann's monologue is one of the greatest monologues in movie history.
Yeah, I think, and I think the one that right now kind of stands out most is Lancaster talking about, his about his time in baseball, and just remembering back to that. I think that's something that immediately stuck out to me as memorable. And then of course there's the scene at the end with Kevin Costner and his father, and it's just really, as soon as because of the language of film, the nature of how filmmakers stage things, you basically know as soon as that as soon as the catcher's mask comes up, that's like, oh, that's obviously Kevin Costner's father. And but that entire final scene with them is just really, really beautiful, and the way that he makes that the way that he makes that palatable scene for his family, and as well as his father, and it's just really lovely. So we will go ahead now and go to 2013's 42, which is from writer-director Brian Helgeland, and it tells the story of Jackie Robinson as he is breaking into the major leagues and the Brooklyn Dodgers as a result of the actions of Dodgers general manager Branch Rickey, played by Harrison Ford. I think the thing that really, I hadn't seen this movie since theaters, and rewatching this, one of the things that really struck me was the fact that this movie is this movie is almost as much about Rickey as it is about Jackie Robinson. And you really, it's one of those things where it, in a way, you kind of wonder what, on the one hand, you wonder, well, does that take too much of the focus away from Robinson? But you can't really, it almost feels like you can't have one story without the other in this case.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you definitely cannot tell Jackie's story without telling the part of Branch Rickey's story where he wants to integrate baseball.
Mm-hmm. What are your general thoughts on 42 as a movie? I mean, I personally think I think it's a fine biopic. It goes into a lot of the typical tropes of biopics, but I mean, I will say the performances by Chadwick Boseman and Harrison Ford really do elevate this beyond just being a biopic, I think.
Yeah, I mean, if it were up to me, they both would have had Oscar nominations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was thinking about that because I do, and I have always really liked Harrison Ford in this. It's one of my, I think it is one of my favorite performances of his. I mean, you can listen to the voice and stuff and some of the mannerisms and think, oh, maybe he's overdoing it, but really he isn't, because of the fact that it does come off as very genuine as part of who the character is. And yeah, I was thinking about who the nominees were that year, and yeah, he definitely would have been my top 5 for this one. Boseman, this was one of those roles that started him on the path to really to the stardom he achieved with Black Panther.
I mean, he was in the James Brown film.
Mm-hmm.
This one, I mean, and I even enjoyed his work in Draft Day.
Yeah, another sports movie with Kevin Costner, actually. And I can't believe I kind of forgot that one.
Kevin Costner cannot escape the genre.
No, and yeah, I can't believe I forgot that one because it has the Cleveland Browns, but that might be because I have issues with the Browns right now. But it's and yeah, Chadwick Boseman's terrific in that one too. I think it's really, I wonder how much, I almost wonder if there was any fighting that Helgeland had to do to make the racism as pronounced as he was, because we do get quite a few instances of the N-word being used, as well as plenty of other racial slurs in this movie towards Jackie Robinson. But it's a PG-13 movie, and I think one of the things that did strike me when I first saw it, and even now, is that he was able to make it, as harsh as he was in terms of the racism within the confines of a PG-13 rating. I was really kind of impressed by that.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing is, I hate racism.
Yeah.
And I will not use that word.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, if you're making a period pick about this, his time of life, if you're making a period pick, you have to try and stay true to that era.
Yeah.
It's ugly to watch when it's happening, but if you don't stay true to the era, it would not have that same, I'm not sure if power is the right word, but it definitely would not feel authentic.
No, when, it's, we do have, I will say it's one of those things where it's like, I know Spike Lee wanted to tell Jackie Robinson's story a lot, or for a while, and then I think Redford was attached at one point before Helgeland finally brought it to the screen. Obviously it would have been a very different movie under Spike Lee, but it's like, you can't help but, it's interesting to wonder, what this movie might have been like with Spike Lee, whether it would have gone harsher, whether we would have gotten a more, it would have been interesting to see how this film would have taken. But at the same time, I do think I think Helgeland does a very good job. It's a smart script. And I think the fact that he focuses so much on Ricky and Jackie equally, I think is the main thing that really helps this film immensely, because of the fact that it is their journey as much as it is anybody's, and you have to have those moments where between those two where they're kind of holding their respective feet to the fire during this.
Yeah, and they're mainly focusing on those first few months in Jackie's career. I'm sure there's no shortage of stories that can be told about the rest of his career, and even after his career. And I know there's been documentaries that have been made, because I see them airing on MLB TV all the time, or MLB Network.
Yeah. I would be remiss though if I also didn't mention Alan Tudyk in this movie as Ben Chapman, because it's funny because as somebody who's been familiar with Tudyk through like Firefly and through some of his more enjoyable performances and characters, it's like this is quite a shock to hear him in as this character, and it really is a chilling performance, and you see just how much it eats at him that Jackie Robinson is in the league with him, and you do really it's one of those moments where you get the overt racism that was facing Robinson about as clearly as you could possibly make it.
Oh yeah.
You know, we also get you do also get moments with Stanky's his teammate who he stands up to Chapman on Robinson's behalf. You have Pee Wee Reese in Cincinnati, going back to Cincinnati, and everything that leads to their moment on the field. And it's you know, overall this movie, I will say I probably like this movie more on the second time than I did the first time, because of the fact that it's like once you take it with a lot of the biopic tropes, and you let the body of the narrative come through, you really just see how effective it is as a biopic and as this one story. And I think part of it might have been the fact that it's like you had the it was so much about Ricky that I didn't necessarily appreciate that on the first viewing as much as I do now.
Yeah, I mean, and the Pee Wee Reese moment, like that's one of the, like, even in baseball history, like that's really the moment where like it changed the course of baseball.
Yeah. Yeah, I would definitely. Yeah, I mean that's definitely the case. I mean, you get the natural postscript of, you know, what happened to everybody, and you know, it's one of those things where it's like this follows a lot of the formulas, but it's like you've got the performances by Boseman and Ford, which are both terrific. You have essentially I would say a workman-like direction from Helgeland, who, you know, I have, you know, I'm not high on as a filmmaker, but overall I think he's a good filmmaker overall. And you know, it's just the nature of the story. The story is what carries this, and the way that this story is ultimately told is what carries this. And I'm glad I had a chance. I'm glad I rewatched it for this episode. It was really good to revisit this.
I mean, and 42 is one of those that I would have revisited right after Chadwick died, just like Draft Day. But it's a bit emotional to watch those films like right after you hear the news that he died.
Yeah. Yeah, I think my go-to was probably Black Panther, just because of the fact that it was, you know, it's a Marvel movie, and obviously it was the one that everybody kind of went to when it comes to Boseman, and he, you know, but I you know, it's like to go to Draft Day. It's like the moment that Vontae Mack is drafted, like you see just in that one moment, it's so beautiful, the acting that Boseman does, and the just pure emotion and joy that you get out of that. He just captures it so perfectly. It's just, you know, we talked about James Horner. It's like I miss James Horner, so being able to really experience his Field of Dreams score for the first time was special to me, because he's always been one of my favorites, and we obviously are not getting any more new James Horner scores. And then with 42, just being able to revisit Boseman's work is always going to be a special experience, whether you're talking about Black Panther or Draft Day or 42. And it is just tragic beyond words that we lost him as he did, because it's like, we will have just gotten dozens upon dozens of more great performances from him.
Oh yeah, like you, I not only did I turn to Black Panther, but I ended up watching Infinity War and Endgame for the upteenth time during the pandemic.
Yeah, I'll admit, it's like my wife and I did talk about doing a Marvel binge before, I think, it Spider No Way Home, but we ended up not doing it because we were busy with a whole bunch of other stuff. But that is a rewatch. That is a long rewatch that I'm due to watch it sometime, and I will definitely look forward to that. And just Bozeman in general. I mean, whether we're talking about whether we're talking about his 42 Gravite, or Defy Bloods, which he was terrific in his scenes in that movie. So we will close out though with a lighter take on the sports genre in 1989's Major League, which is from David S. Ward, who wrote The Sting, won an Oscar for The Sting. And it basically follows the Cleveland Indians in basically your tradition. This is the most overtly traditional underdog sports movie, because it takes a bunch of misfits and basically sees them succeed as winners by the end of the season. And just out of curiosity, what is it about Major League that stands out to you as being a favorite among the baseball movies?
Bobby Uecker.
Yeah. And it's funny because as much of a Cleveland person as I am, around 2016, when the Indians started getting really good again and the Cavs won the championship, I really started to get more into starting to really reappreciate Cleveland sports. I finally remember, it's like, oh yeah, Major League is about the Indians. I completely forgot about that for some reason. So I've seen it a few times since then, and I love that it starts with the Randy Newman song about the Cuyahoga River. And it's funny because of the fact that, as somebody who has the memories of Cleveland sports, it's funny to see this movie and have an owner of a Cleveland sports team who not only considers moving the team but also is very cheap on payroll, because the Guardians, as they're now known, is dealing with a payroll issue and have for a few years, and then the Browns, a few years after this movie came out, had their owner move the team to Baltimore. And it's funny to see almost how accidentally prescient Ward was in those two things. This is just a movie that's just fun. It just shows you get all of these different characters like Willie Mays Hayes, Ricky Vaughn, Jake Taylor, and it's just it's very much that traditional rags to riches story. And it's you mentioned Bob Uecker's the announcer, and indeed, I mean, it is one of the more iconic. It's one of the iconic, if not the iconic, announcer characters in movie history. And this is one that definitely is always kind of entertaining for me to watch. Is it basically just because of Bob Uecker, or is there something about the comedy in this? Because the comedy, I will say, I'm pleasantly surprised that there's certainly some cringeworthy comedy in this film still. Now looking at now, but I mean, so much of it still is kind of good natured. And I think there's good natured ribbing more than just, oh, we're gonna be kind of, we're it doesn't quite date as poorly as some 80s comedies do.
Yeah, I mean, and this is another one of those films that I rewatched around the time of the 30th anniversary and haven't really rewatched it since.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, a lot of that's because I keep going back to the same content during the pandemic, like your
Yeah.
Home Alones, your Marvel movies, your Star Wars, your Jurassic Parks.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and I mean, I certainly understand the need for the need for to go back to like comfort movies and comfort, and and that's one of the things I think I like about underdog movies and about sports movies in general. I think that might be one of the reasons I gravitate toward them, is because of the fact that it's like these movies, they ultimately give you hope, or are intended to give you hope, and they're intended to make you feel like no matter how bad something gets, like things can get better. Whether it will take time, and certainly it will take time, but if you make, well, no, that's I think and that's one of the reasons why I think there's an interesting connection beyond just being about baseball in this, is that they're basically all about they're all about characters who are trying to make things better for other characters, whether it's their teammates or whether it's society, or whether it's these icons in sports in the case of Field of Dreams, or their own or their own healing process when it comes to their family. And I think that's one of the things I just love about sports movies, and it is why I go back to sports movies so much, is because of the fact that it's like it's that nature, it's that idea of it's the idea of being able to overcome what life throws at us. And I think that's something that I certainly resonate in this genre with.
Yeah, I mean, like Cool Runnings and Miracle, like those are some of my go-to films around the Olympics.
Yeah. Yeah, and
I mean, even though Jamaica does not win in the end, but the whole world basically rallied around them.
Yeah.
I mean, just to see that applause as they're walking their sled to the finish line.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And it's just something that it gives us, it just gives us something to believe in, and that's one of the things that ultimately sports does. I think, and I mean, I think that's, for me, that's part of what his, that's honestly, that's part of what's made, one in particular choice that the Browns have made recently so disheartening, is because of the fact that it feels like they're rather than inspiring, it feels like it's just about, it's just about succeeding at all costs, regardless of what, regardless of what you give up. And I think that's been my one problem, and it's probably why I might just stick to baseball this year and actually just go ahead and just cheer for the Braves this year and not really follow football too much. I did sports when I was growing up, but it's like it was never one of those things that I was going to be as successful for in terms of personal accomplishment. But my interests lie in more creative endeavors. But it's one of those things where it's like, I watch a good sports movie and it's going to put me in a mood regardless of how good or bad it is. And I mean, I think that's one of the things that I liked about all three of these, is that they all put me in that mood in their own ways.
I mean, I played t-ball when I was growing up, but then I was forced into early retirement.
Yeah. I think I did T-ball, but I mean, I know I did bowling growing up, I did tennis growing up, I did soccer when I was in Ohio, but yeah, I mean, ultimately I went to band and basically didn't look back. And with there aren't as many inspirational stories as far as, well, there are, but they're inspirational in their own ways. As far as about musicians, as there are sports stories. Yeah. And so what are some of, we talked about three in particular, but what are some of your other baseball movies that you really really appreciate and love?
I mean, The Sandlot, I mean, Little Big League, I'll turn to for the nostalgia, even though that storyline is not realistic. I mean, even Rookie of the Year. I mean, I know Thomas Ian Nicholas. I've met him several times at Comic Cons, but that's another one that, like, I dislike the Cubs with the passion, but I mean, that's one of those films that, I mean, I'll watch for the fantasy of it all,
Mm-hmm.
even
Yeah.
though I dislike the team at the center. I mean, Angels in the outfield. I did a rewatch a few weeks ago. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, just because I was in the mood for a baseball movie, and it was, see, was that on Disney Plus or YouTube TV? It was one of the two. But I mean, just turning to all these classics just for comfort, or because I wasn't really in the mood for watching one of these new releases that I knew was gonna lose my focus.
Yeah. No, I mean, and I think that's one of the that is certainly one of the values of rewatching. And I think that's one of the things that it's like, especially writing about movies as frequently as we do, especially, the pressure is obviously to watch the newer ones and talk about those.
Yeah.
But I mean, there is so much value in rewatching, and one of the things that I know, following you, one of the things I appreciate is when you go into watching those older movies, whether it's for an anniversary, whether it's just for the sake of watching and writing about it. And I think that's one of the things that, I mean, that I know that's one of the things I've tried to do over the years is like when I started to really rewatch and write about older movies. Part of the reason was because some of them were movies that I wanted to write about for a while, but it also gets you back in touch with why those movies were special to you in the first place, or why they you don't necessarily feel the same way about them now.
Yeah, like, I mean, it's interesting watching some of these films that I grew up with for an anniversary piece and realizing that, yeah, I don't feel the same way that I did when I first watched it, or holy crap, I did not appreciate that part of the film when I was growing up.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, after this week, I mean, I watched In Search of Tomorrow, which is this 5-hour documentary on 80s sci-fi cinema. And like, I've been seeing the same clip of Maccabee for a number of years. And so that was featured, and I'm like, where is this streaming? And then I finally bit the bullet and watched it the other night.
Yeah.
And then I decided to watch Honey, I Shrunk the Kids again. And I mean, the production design that goes into a film like that,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's just amazing.
Yeah. No, it is, and and especially because I mean that's the era where I was young too. Like I was in my early, I was around 10 or so, 10, 11 when Mac and Me came out, and it's like rewatching some of those movies. I mean, I recently talked about Don Bluth movies on the Binge Movies podcast, and it's funny because three of those movies I had not actually seen because by that point I kind of grown
Which
out
three?
of it. Land Before Time, All Dogs Go to Heaven, and Rockadoodle. I had kind of grown out of watching family movies by that point. I was more interested in watching what my parents wanted to what my parents were watching at that time, and going back, but also revisiting American Tail, revisiting Secret of Nim for that discussion. It really, I very much had a different reaction to those movies when I was growing up. I enjoyed those movies very much so, but I look at them now and you see the different layers of what Don Bluth is doing in those. You see the techniques of what Don Bluth is doing in those, and you see even something that like The Land Before Time, which is arguably almost better known for GIFs and the fact there are dozens of sequels to it than the movie itself. You look at that movie and you see there's okay, so this is not just it's not just a silly dinosaur movie for kids. It has real ideas about family, about loss, and about moving past your grief to survive. And I think that is it's one of those things that I really appreciate about rewatches, and something that I really love about rewatches. And I try to rewatch as much as I can, and I think sometimes being able to do that for just the sake of rewatching it, just for the sake of having that experience, it really does kind of open you up to when you have that experience as rewatching. It makes it easier if you don't feel any pressure in the rewatch. I think it opens you up to really seeing things in the movies that you didn't before.
Yeah. I mean, Land Before Time, I mean, that's the first film I remember seeing in theaters.
Yeah.
So South by 2019, I get to interview Frank Marshall for The Gift, The Journey of Johnny Cash. And after the interview wrapped, I mean, I thanked him for my childhood because he played a role in so many of those Spielberg films.
Yeah. We didn't really talk about it at the beginning, and you mentioned Jurassic Park. Who are some of those filmmakers that you might appreciate, and some of those films that you kind of appreciate more often more than others?
I mean, Spielberg, obviously. I mean, I wasn't that big of a horror fan growing up, and I'm still not that big of a horror fan, but I mean, I'm trying to watch more and more of these Hitchcock films.
Mm-hmm.
I know there's another 4K collection coming out in May that I would like to add on to my current collection, which includes, let's see, the British International Pictures collection from, I think that was Kino, Blackmail, Murder from Kino. Warner Archive put out a 4-film collection, Stage Fright. Paramount presents To Catch a Thief, and then North by Northwest is one of those that I could watch repeatedly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, North by Northwest is my mom's favorite movie, and I didn't watching with her. I watched was introduced to Arsenic and Old Lace as a kid, and it's something
that's a classic.
Oh, I love that movie, and I still love watching that movie, and it's that's one that I really am. It's one of those reasons I'm really grateful to her for the fact that she introduced me to a lot of stuff like that, like Mel Brooks's movies, like at a young age, because of the fact that it's like it really helped me grow into somebody who wasn't just interested in one specific thing about film. And I mean, even though at a certain point my taste, my interest in films surpassed hers in terms of being interested in foreign films and documentaries on a more regular basis, on a more plentiful basis, it's something that I will always be grateful to her for instilling in me that the idea that there are different movies that I could like beyond just what was out in theaters. And I think that's being able to experience stuff like that, whether you've seen it for the first time or the 20th time, it's always remarkable.
Yeah, and there's still things that are in my blind spots. I mean, having to go through college for 4 years without a car, means that, and this was a time when we didn't have Netflix. So
Yeah.
I mean, you don't really have enough time to catch up on movies. I remember The Departed, I watched that during spring break after it won Best Picture.
Yeah. Yeah.
So outside that, it's like that brief time during fall break, spring break, summer break, winter break. That's it. And if I didn't catch a film during Thanksgiving break, I'd have to watch it during winter break.
Yeah.
And then, of course, growing up in Louisville, that means some of these indie films, they're blink and miss it.
Yeah.
And thankfully, that was before the push of 3D movies, as otherwise, that would really be taking away screens.
Yeah. No, and no, that's actually that is very true. Yeah, I mean, I know when I was in when I was in college, I mean, you know, that was as I was really starting to get heavy into movies, and I was grateful enough, I was thankful enough to be able to be on campus, and you know, I got to see movies. Excuse me. There were art houses near me because I was in downtown Atlanta, and so I got to frequent the art houses. I did get to frequent the university screen room that had some of these independent films, and that's how I saw some just terrific films for the first time. And yeah, it's I know, especially because when you have something like college going on, it can definitely be a challenge, and that is one of the things where availability is an issue, and I know that's something that you've talked about a lot, as much in terms of what the studios have done over the past couple of years when it comes to access of critical screenings versus screeners being released. And I agree wholeheartedly with all of that because of the fact that it's like, I know screenings were a boon. Press screeners were a boon to me when, you know, when the pandemic was going on and movie theaters were shut down. So
Yeah, I mean, especially for some of these markets that wouldn't otherwise get a press screening. I
yeah.
mean, when I lived in Louisville, it was basically Disney and Lionsgate that had regular press screenings. Every now and then, Fox might appear out of the blue with a screening. Although, for some reason or another, Disney did not do a press screening of Force Awakens when I was living in Louisville. I had to see that one that Thursday night.
Yeah. Yeah.
And of course, living in Chicago, like, thankfully, it's a better market, but still, like, I mean, some of these family-friendly films are only screening on Saturdays. Like, Universal has The Bad Guys coming up next month, and the save the date is for a Saturday morning. And I'm like, I'm sober Shabbos. Is there going to be a link available?
Yeah.
Because otherwise, I'm not going to be able to have a review.
Yeah. And I certainly, you know, and I will admit, I certainly don't have that, you know, I certainly don't have that, you know, I certainly don't have as many issues in terms of getting to screenings as some critics do, and for a very personal reason for you, it's one of those things where it's like they really do need to, you know, as much as I'd like to see the industry shift, it sometimes feels like they shift back in the opposite direction as fast as they can when a new opportunity arises for access, and it's always it always kind of, I mean, it shouldn't surprise me at this point, but I guess it kind of baffles me, I guess, is the more opportune way of putting it.
Yeah, I mean, for as many people that say Jews control Hollywood, why are they making it tougher for us to cover movies when the holidays fall during the week? I mean, I remember it was Toronto last year. I mean, like, I lost 2 full days of prep because of Rosh Hashanah heading into the festival. And of course, I'm off for Shabbos. The next week's Yom Kippur, but then going into that, I get to save the date for the new Bond film. And sure enough, it's on Simchas Torah. So, for Shemini Atzeret. Yeah, one of the either Bond was Shimini on Third or Simcast Torah, and then Venom 2 was the other holiday. But either way, like when you lose out, I mean, Bond was like the biggest movie to date. And to lose out on that film would have just been epically bad. I mean, it triggered a depression going into Yom Kippur, which was not fun, especially with watching 2 Holocaust films that day during the morning and afternoon. But I mean, thankfully, MGM was able to work out another screening in Chicago, and I was able to see the film that following Thursday.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's just tough, especially when the holidays fall during the week. I mean, thankfully, maybe one day of Passover is during the week this year. Shavuos is on the weekend, so the only day I lose is Monday. But when all the holidays are during the week, I mean, it's just so tough to get anything done.
Yeah. No, I can only imagine. I mean, it's like I know I have, I have a full-time job, but that's not the same thing. But it still does make it tough to try to work our way around what the studio's schedule is, and it's I know for me it's like I've had to sort of shift my work schedule around for screenings of Batman and Marvel movies and stuff like that, and make sure I have off for those specific days. But yeah, I mean it's I know that's one of the things that following you on Twitter I've been more aware of is the struggle with access and the struggle with studios just not really being as flexible as they probably should be when it comes to getting critics access to new releases, because I mean, all critics know that it's the new releases are what drive readership towards our websites, if we have our own individual websites, or new articles that we may write for other people. And it's just one of those things where it can get difficult to be able to do that.
Yeah, and then I mean, and if you can't see it in theaters ahead of time, I mean, there's always the hope that the home entertainment release will be able to bring us some traffic, but you never know. I mean, it just depends on the film.
Yeah. Well, before we wrap up, I'd like to give you the chance one more time to tell people where they can find you online.
Solzy at themovies.com. That's SOLZY. I'm on Twitter and Instagram at Danielle SATM, and Facebook at Solzy at the Movies.
Okay.
I also have a Substack, which you can find linked off of my the sidebar on SolzyAtTheMovies.com.
Yeah, and and certainly, I mean, if there's opportunities to subscribe and follow a writer like Danielle, by all means do. It's always an insightful read as well as an entertaining read. And thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you again.
I'd like to thank Danielle for her time to discuss baseball movies and discuss film criticism and being a film critic in general. That was a good discussion to have. That's it for this episode of the Sonic Cinema podcast. Coming up at the end of the month, we have another chapter in the Established Classics series with Timothy J. Cox, and then the summer hits, and like I said, we will have Danielle back to talk Jurassic Park and then and more. And it's going to be an interesting summer, and I'm looking forward to talking about it. You can find me at patreon.com/SonicCinema, the Sonic Cinema podcast on Apple, Google, and Spotify, as well as the Sonic Cinema podcast YouTube channel, and then, of course, as always, at www.sonic-cinema.com. Thank you very much.